The reason that we have this topic as part of that whole training series is that this topic focuses on policymaker contact. It's a complement to all of the other parts of our training that focus on voter contact. This moves our vision a little more over toward the policymaker side. And we've done this because it's important for the grassroots organizer to understand how government and politics work, because a grassroots organizer wants their efforts to be effective, and they want their members' efforts to be effective. We want to focus on the grassroots organizers, but also if you are an individual working on your own advocacy plan, we're hoping that this can be helpful for you. This is a presentation for optimists, for people like me who think that we can make a difference. I do truly believe that. And I'm hoping that those of you who signed in for this have that same feeling. What we're going to be doing in this presentation is we're just going to start with the basics. And by the basics, we're going to look at some worksheets that are in the workbook. There is a step-by-step workbook that goes along with this presentation, and it is truly step-by-step. It's do this, do that, and then go forth. And so I'm going to show you how to use those worksheets, but they're designed for you to work on them yourself or to share them with your Democrat club or whatever group that you're trying to help be more effective in reaching out. We're then going to talk about how do you pick the issues that you want to go forth on, and then how do you decide who you should talk to and what you should say. Throughout this presentation, there'll be just some references to other training materials that are helpful, because all of our training materials really relate to each other, because we're using many of the same skills, many of the same approaches from one training to the next. Kaz has already mentioned last week we had our Civics for Everyone, and it gives you the underpinnings or how to understand the basics of our Constitution and federal and state legislation, and a little bit on elections. So if you're dealing with a group that you feel might need to go back to those basics, we have that presentation online. We have a workbook that goes along with it. And I think also that can be helpful depending on what kind of support that you think your group needs. In the workbook, we have things we call cheat sheets, and they are designed for you to do some pre-planning to figure out who are the policymakers that are most relevant to you, your group, your neighbors. And it's organized so that you first think about what is the jurisdiction of the policymaker. Now, that's one of those legal terms that it can just seem sort of just confusing or perhaps not very understandable. But what we want to make sure we understand is who has responsibility. Jurisdiction is really almost like a concept of responsibility. Who is responsible for this, like a geographical area in which I live, or who is responsible for a particular subject matter that I'm concerned about. And so as we're working through the cheat sheets, we're trying to keep these concepts in mind. Who's in charge? What is the area that they're in charge of? And then who should I be reaching out to in terms of the individuals involved? So in this presentation, when there's that logo at the top that says workbook, it means that what we're talking about here is covered in the workbook, and we have go step by step through the workbook. This is the simplest part of the workbook, and you can start off strong by knowing what state you're in, but then working through, what is the county, and you would have if you're dealing with a group, then have your group members fill this out. Again, it starts easy and then it builds up with maybe some of the more difficult questions as, what school district are they in? What are they in a special service area that they would need to be aware of? So that's the step one in the workbook. The step two in the workbook is putting down some names. Who are your U.S. senators? Who is your U.S. representative? And again, for like the U.S. representative and a little bit farther down for the state senator, the state representative, if you're dealing with a group, you are going to help the members of your group figure out which congressional district they're in and who is their representative and how do you contact them. If, as the leader of a group, if you can get this pulled together ahead of time, then you can have a quicker response if something comes up where you need to reach out very quickly. But also it can help you start thinking about issues like you're, down a little bit farther, if you have to say who your county commissioners are, well, then you might think, well, these are my county commissioners, but what do they do? And then you might find out that your county commissioners are in charge of the roads in your area. And if they're in charge of the roads in your area and you want to complain about the potholes, then you would know, these are my county commissioners, they're in charge of roads. If I have potholes, I need to write to them. And I want you to be continually thinking as you identify these folks, what's their jurisdiction? What are they legally responsible for? And how do the things that matter to me match up with their jurisdiction, their responsibility? On this page, we just use this word take note. And what we are reminding you here is that before you become an advocate on a particular issue, just take the time to plan or to fill out the cheat sheets and to plan where you should go and who you should talk to. And then again, if you're dealing with a group, how would you help your members figure out who they need to reach out to? The bottom of the sheet is something we've just added in case what you're wanting to do is be supportive of particular candidates, which Building Bridges does. It asks you to be very specific and to understand what the office is that the candidate is running for. What is the jurisdiction of that office? I can tell you, and it probably would not apply to folks on this call, that there is often confusion when someone reads that Terry Mumford is running for representative, and they don't immediately think, well, is that a state representative or is it a U.S. representative? So something as basic as that can be confusing, but you can be helping your members by clarifying again, what is the office? What is the jurisdiction, and then helping them go forward with their support. The next thing we have you do in the workbook is then to identify your issues. This step can be helpful if you're sitting around with some like-minded people who want to get more involved. There's just a temptation to be involved in everything. I mean, because so many things are coming at us and asking for our attention. And what we ask you to do in this part of the workbook is really narrow your focus, which some people think, well, I don't want to narrow my focus. I want to, everything needs to change. But what we find over, the years with experience is that you can be interested in everything, but in terms of your advocacy, it's very likely that you're more effective if you have narrowed your focus and identified the issues that mean the most to you. In the workbook, we ask you to identify sort of like your favorite issues, or in two categories. One yeah, the category of things are just like immediate to you, like potholes. Or if you have a child who you want to get a COVID vaccine, but you can't find where to do that. So we ask you or your group to think of the two immediate or very close to home issues, and then think of something that's a broader policy issue, and school vouchers or voting rights or the issues of homeless people. So we asked, again, this is hopefully to help you home in on what is really motivating you and your group for change. And then in addition, we asked then as a next step, after you've gotten those issues listed, is to identify organizations that are also working on these issues. And that can be done just out of your general knowledge, or that can be done by good old Google. And because that also, but the reason we have you do that is so that when you're looking for background information, so that you'll have a better understanding, or when you're looking for perhaps talking points, most organizations will help you. We'll have some helpful talking points. Or if you want to rely on the organizations to help you monitor legislation. I worked in and around the Indiana State House for a very long time. If you're there, you can see what they're doing, what they're doing, and you just have this feeling that everybody would know that. And then you retire, and then you want to know what's going on with legislation. You go, well, that's not as easy as I thought it was. So, but then you can, but on the other hand, I can be checking out League of Women Voters of Indiana to find out how voting rights bills are doing or how redistricting is doing, and they will have that tracking information. The other thing that we ask you to do in this part of the workbook is to just, from the very beginning, when you're talking about your issue, when you've identified your issue, is to come up with some key terms that you want to use to consistently and positively describe your issues. And that will, the more, doing that right up front may seem like I'm doing it too early, but you aren't. It is never too early to start framing and talking about your issues positively, taking the initiative of how you want to describe your issues. And the direct opposite of that is reacting and echoing how someone else describes your issue. So in the workbook, we take you through those steps, and then we ask you to tie it all together. And the way we ask you to tie it all together is to identify, who's in charge, what's the best way to explain your issue, and how to make your views known. This is a page from the workbook for you to fill out on the issues that you have identified. So if you're talking about roads, the potholes, whatever's, that the other, another favorite and important one is, do you need a stoplight or a stop sign in your neighborhood? Do you need sidewalks in your neighborhood? Really important issues, and important issues where individuals can have a lot of impact. You would do that research to find out who is in charge of that issue. Who should you write to? Who should you talk to about that issue? And then you identify, frame, and formulate the statement of your issue. Trying to always start with what would be the point of agreement. Like we all can agree that well-maintained roads are important for safety and for getting people to work and for getting kids to school. The message is, and we put the word "my" message because it is absolutely crucial that anytime you're communicating with a policymaker, that you make them aware of how this issue is affecting you, your family, your grandchildren. And so make sure that you, as you're crafting the message, you are making sure it is your message. I'll just digress here for a minute. Oftentimes we get a question in this presentation about using canned messages or signing on to petitions. And I really am such an advocate for making sure we send a personal message, that I would really encourage you to take that direction. And then you work on, then the next thing is, okay, we've done that. So I've had this incredibly, I've prepared this really well thought out, focused personal message. And now I need to get it delivered. So where do I deliver the message? One of the points here is when you're talking about the who's in charge part, and you're figuring out who you want to write to and who you want to persuade, or make sure you reach out to people who are both for and against your point of view. And that, I think, is, well, that's true in general, but it's very true if we're talking about legislation. You'll see something on Facebook, or you'll get a message and say, Representative Jones is killing us on this issue, and you've got to write him and tell him that he's doing a very bad job, which is not what you're going to end up doing. But make sure, if there's someone who is doing a really good job in supporting your issue, that you communicate with them. And then when went through that step of identifying and framing and formulating the issue, it's a great idea if you have a group to have to have a group point of view, to say, we are the concerned parents of Hamilton County, and this is why we were formed. These are our goals, and we're going to achieve these goals in a particular way. The organization can compile some facts and some figures, and you can share resources. But then you want to take it again to that individual approach, the individual communication. If you're with a group, make sure you are helping the group members identify their issue in very positive ways, to frame their issues around values, and to state how they are affected personally. If your members are writing to their legislators, make sure that you're asking them to, and I'm talking about like a state legislature, make sure you are having your members write to their representative. This is to state the obvious, but in representative government, our representatives should be responsive to the people who elect them, to their constituents. And so if your members are in different state representative districts, or they're in different city council districts, have your members know which district they're in, and have them communicate with their elected representative. We also have some, we also would encourage you to look for opportunities that are beyond the email, the postcard, the letter, the phone call. Perhaps appear in person. As citizens, we should feel that we are welcome to go to the State House and talk to our legislators, or to a city council meeting, or to a school board meeting, and express our views in a very positive and constructive but personal way. And as we note here, make sure that when you are communicating, you are clear as to where you live and whose constituent you are. On this slide, we just talked about some of the specifics of communicating with a policymaker. If you can make that phone call, do it. Be prepared. Write down. That's what I have to do. I have to write down what I'm going to say before I say it. And even if I'm going to leave the voicemail, you can. It's okay. It's even a good idea if you want to leave. Make a phone call, send an email, send a letter or a postcard. And as we've commented here, please avoid the form letters or the postcards, or personalize them. If your group has come up with an important message that you want to have in every communication and every postcard, that's fine. But then, take that pen and write your own personal message, whether it's a couple sentences or not. We also would have you consider writing a letter to the editor for a local paper or a trade publication or a blog. In the workbook, there are examples of how this process works in some particular areas. We have one example that's on voting rights. We have one example that's on a local issue. So you can see by using the workbook how the steps are brought together, and you don't have to use those, but it just gives you an idea of how you might pull them all together, how you could frame the message, and then how you would deliver that message. I have spent some time recently, and I'm sure many of you have too, reaching out to my US senators about federal voting rights. And I have been referring to information provided by Common Cause. And I was doing some work with them on the federal voting rights. And so these were some things that they asked us to think about, things that we were concerned about. And these were some of the issues that I came up with that I wanted to make sure that I expressed to my US senators, who are each of whom is opposed to that legislation. But I also used these same or similar talking points to write to my US congressman, because he supported the Voting Rights Act. So I let Congressman Carson know that I appreciated his support and mentioned these same points. These are some of our pro tips. They really go around, they really focus on being positive. We encourage our members to write to their policymakers just to let them know that they're out, that the constituents are out there. We encourage them to express support not just opposition. And there's a message in here that we can probably, what do they say? You can't emphasize enough. I never quite know what that means, but we are really emphasizing that we want to always express our viewpoints in a positive, what we are for, as opposed to what we are against. And we want to avoid just repeating what our opponent has said. And I've talked about this, that it is good. It's a good idea to make sure we express our support when a policymaker does what we want them to do. And I do this whether the person is in my same party or not. In this, this is talking about the situations when you are part of a group and you're getting a group together to organize around an issue. And I guess asking that group then to spend time on issue identification, framing and explaining points of view, figuring out who should be contacted, and then also casting kind of a broad net in terms of where you're going to take your message. So for most of the remainder of our time here, I'm going to ask you, and Cass will have to help me because I can't see the chat. But I'm asking you to how you would create a strategy for communicating when we have certain important issues out there. And the first scenario is we have purple parents who are organizing a large turnout at the next school board meeting. And they're going to demand an end to CRT. They're going to demand an end to social emotional learning. And they're going to demand an end to unpatriotic education. And so I want you to help me, because this is a really important issue. How can we use our Civics for Change approach to support the school? Because I think we do. So there are 3 questions here, and you can answer all 3 or any one of them. Perhaps you're just starting out, and we had this in Indiana. We had a group of this is happening in Indiana, and we had a group of parents, a small group of parents, who said, we just have to do something. We need to get started and do something. So if you're in that small group of parents, what organization would you turn to get the facts? So that's the question 1. So you can answer that if you want. And then question 2 is, again, this small group of parents was trying to figure out, well, who would they contact? I mean, I guess to make it easy, would they contact the school board members? Who else would they contact, and how would they do that? And then the third question is, what would you say? What would be the key points that you would say in making these communications? So Kaz, are there any, have folks made some suggestions here yet, or?
Not yet. We are still looking for them. And I myself am thinking about that first one, about where people would get the facts on something like this. Because my instinct would be to go to my current board member. What if my current board member is not someone I trust?
Right, right. Well, another place interestingly, again, this group, which I followed them on Facebook because the first thing I saw was someone say, kind of like, I don't know what to do. Are there people out there who agree with me that something needs to be done? And apparently there were, because then there was some, they start with, well, how do we know what's going on? And they said, well, one of the places they were going to go was to the teacher union. They thought they would go to the, which in Indiana is the ISTA. That's the NEA affiliate in Indiana. And they thought they would go there, but actually it turns out that didn't have enough information. So they did ask actually the school administrator what they thought was going on. But then they decided they really needed to read what they needed to see if there were already school policies or state policies on educational standards. So I'll just go to the next slide.
Real
This,
fast, you were talking about going and talking about standards. Susan did mention maybe going to the Department of Education for your state.
exactly.
Mhm.
Well, this topic, I mean, I was very fortunate to be in a Zoom call roundtable that included some Indiana school superintendents. And in Indiana, a school superintendent is the highest person in a school district. So the school superintendent is above the principals, and it's a very, very important position in Indiana. And they went through those questions, and they said, well, you know, what there actually might be a school policy on these issues. And it turns out that in Indiana, or in a number of schools in Indiana, they do have a policy. They of course have no policy on CRT because it is not taught in the elementary school. You know, in the school superintendents would be the superintendents over K through 12 education. So they would say there is no policy on that. But there is a policy on social and emotional learning, because many school districts have adopted that as something they want to help their students be able to express, or to be able to have support when they have issues. And then there are also, as Susan said, there in fact are state standards, and there are state curriculum guidelines. So those are out there. And then on the who do you talk to, again, this is what the school superintendents suggested would be helpful to them, because they are feeling beleaguered and attacked, and not without reason. And they said, you know, please communicate as a constituent to your school board members. This would be one, you know, and you can either, as Kaz was saying, if you have a concern that the school board member who represents your area is not going to be supportive, but you might not know that. Because so kind of maybe just going into it, you would write to your school board members and say, this is my view. I think that, you know, fair and honest education is important. And then if you should also, as you know, if there are meetings, then you can go and first of all listen, because then you might, you know, that would help you know what was going on, but also express your views in a very positive way. They did suggest that even though this is an issue which might be initially focused at the school board level, you would also write to your legislators and say what your views are. And again, keep on, when we think back to our cheat sheet, think back to how we were going to fill in who is the, you know, who is the school board member who represents the place where I live, or who is the legislator who represents the place where I live. And that's who we are going to communicate with. And then as a larger issue, or not as a larger issue, but in terms of a larger jurisdiction, it is reasonable to write to the Department of Education and to the governor to say what you are concerned about. Because if you remember from the Civics for Everyone, the in Indiana and other states, you know, the legislative process is such that if some legislation on the same topic were to move through the legislative process, it could end up on the governor's desk, and we would want the governor to know what our views are. And then what do you talk about? This was the advice, and this is, I got this quote directly from the superintendents. It was to focus on the work and not on the words. And this is what they were getting at, is you don't get wrapped up in the negative phrasing that the purple parents are using. Focus on what the schools are trying to achieve, and that is that children should flourish. Education should be should be fair and honest. And so that's some super good advice. The other thing they talked about is they called it, staying in the middle of the road. And when I presented that another time, I think that can be confusing. It meant a lot to me at the time, but I think can be confusing. But what they were saying is, stay focused on what is your immediate concern. Because what you can see sometimes, and you may have seen this, is that people start talking about a specific issue and then they go off on, another issue that they have with public education. But if you want to be talking about preserving honest education in our schools, if you want to be concerned about preserving support systems for kids, then you stay on those issues and don't cover all the issues that you would like to cover. As has happened here, as was predicted by these school superintendents, what has happened in Indiana is that we started off with the purple parents, and that is actually the group, the purple parents showing up at school boards and talking about how they didn't think that there should only be patriotic education, that you shouldn't there shouldn't be CRT, and then of course they tossed in the mask issue at the same time, and there was a lot of activity around that, and it translated or just moved itself over to the State House. And there's more than one piece of legislation being considered in the Indiana legislature right now on a variety of topics, around a variety of aspects of this topic. The state rep, they're moving legislation which would make it would prohibit teachers from teaching CRT. It would prohibit teachers from teaching anything which would make students feel bad about themselves. And the legislation was introduced in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, and that happens quite a bit. The Senate bill died after a lot of public outcry. The House bill came out of the House, went over to the Senate, and is now being considered in the Senate. As a result of lots and lots of individual input, that legislation, again, it's a House bill over in the Senate, that legislation is being modified. Things are being taken out of it, such as parents can no longer sue a teacher for teaching something they don't like. But the bill still is moving with some very adverse parts in it, in my view. So again, we want to come up with, and if you all have had similar circumstances, maybe not dealing with this issue, but if you have some suggestions on how you would reach out in these situations, how you would frame your issue, your thoughts on this issue, and how you would get your message across, I'd love to hear those in the chat. I'll just, as you're perhaps thinking of that, I'll just maybe continue with a little bit of the story of the group of parents who started, just communicating with each other, setting up their own group, and they came up with a really, I thought, great idea. And you could just see this evolve on Facebook. They came up with the idea that February the 14th, this past Monday, was going to be breakup day. And when I first saw that, I said, I just do not know what they're talking about. But breakup day meant that the constituents were going to break up with the legislature on Valentine's Day if the legislature did not kill this legislation. And they had sign up sheet, sign up sheets where you could say you were, going and what you were, what you should wear, red. And it motivated other groups to be part of this breakup discussion. And it kept growing until there was more than one day you would go to that. You were encouraged to go to the legislature. They had several days, and the teacher unions, the school boards association, and other groups took different days to go to the State House and just be there with homemade signs. Homemade signs are really good. And where they would talk to their legislators and tell them their views. I don't know how this will turn out because it hasn't turned out yet, but it has been so exciting, so invigorating to see what an impact individuals have when they believe that they can have an impact. So I don't know, Cass, if we've had any thoughts or questions, if folks have given us any ideas, because we're always looking for good ideas.
No, we haven't had any yet, although Chris and I kind of almost wrote over each other when you said that they were claiming that the purple side was claiming that it was patriotic, and Chris said the truth is patriotic.
The truth is patriotic.
And that is correct framing, right? That's
good framing. And the other thing is that, I mean, it's only recently do I even use the letter CRT. I have so avoided even saying that because it's nothing, but I've just had to, just amongst us have I used it, because it's what, we want our kids to know what happened, what happened last week, last month, last year. I mean, as a parent of 4 children, how many times do you tell your kids, don't you remember what I told you? And it's, how can kids formulate their behavior for the future if they're not told what happened in the past? And there's been some really, and this is our what our conclusions are, but I can see it really playing out here, and that is that there individual teachers, individual parents, students themselves have written very effective, very short, very positive statements about how important it is to learn the truth. That there's hard, like one teacher called it hard history. He teaches hard history. And I thought, well, that's a good one. And another person said they teach honest history. And there are so many really great formulations that did not get into that defensive posture. So I was really, so this slide just, I hope, summarizes what are the important issues, what are the important messages to take away. And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things that was frustrating to me several months ago when the purple parents showed up was that I would hear friends say, or you'd see on Facebook, or people say, oh, it's just, why? It's just terrible. The purple parents are going to go up there and they're going to be all so persuasive, and they're just going to tell the school board, and the school board is going to do what they're going to do. And I was kept waiting to hear someone say, well, we can do the same thing. You don't have to wear purple, but we can do the same thing. We can have that impact. And if we don't do that, then we are just leaving all the ground open for people who we don't agree with to have their message get across. We also, just in summary, Don't think the facts speak for themselves. What speaks for things is you. So you have to speak. You have to explain your why. And you can really spend no time at all, and should spend no time at all talking about your opponents. But make sure you're explaining your point of view.